With hybrid training rising in popularity at the moment, you might be asking yourself, should you train like a hybrid athlete? With hybrid athletes like Nick Bare, Fergus Crawley, and many others all doing some amazing things with their body and showing us what can be done with both strength and endurance training, it can be really appealing to start hybrid training. I mean, who doesn't want to be big, strong, and fit at the same time? But the big question is, should you start hybrid training? So by the end of this video, I hopefully want you to understand whether hybrid training is for you, whether it's going to be right for you in your current training journey, and if it is, what's the next steps for you to start cracking on to become a hybrid athlete. So let's get into it. Now, as someone who got into training relatively late in life, I'd say I was about 23, so back in 2012. I did some other training before that, so, you know, the classic bro splits and bicep curls, some really dodgy quarter squats, the usual stuff. But I got into some proper structured training probably about 2012. So that was following strength programs, working on my technique, learning more about strength training and pretty much the industry as a whole. And over, say, the past 13 years, I've really enjoyed the pursuit of just trying to not be shit at most things. So over the last 13 years, I've dabbled in quite a lot of fitness methodologies. I've competed in natural bodybuilding competitions. I've done some powerlifting competitions. I've done some CrossFit competitions. I've specialized into some gymnastics, some running, some cycling, some triathlon. I've played some rugby league, and I've done so much more. So hybrid training to me is being able to be good at kind of most things, so being strong and being fit. And when you're pretty strong and pretty fit, you're pretty good at most things. So it's similar to CrossFit, but not quite CrossFit, because you're focusing on mainly just two disciplines of strength and endurance rather than all the other bits in between, which, don't get me wrong, I still enjoy dabbling in a bit of CrossFit here and there. My body just can't take the kipping pull-ups anymore. Trust me, I've tried recently. So for me, even though I've dabbled in so much over the years, strength training has always been at the baseline of everything that I do. It underpins everything. So now that I've got into hybrid training myself, strength training still has a very strong focus within my training, but it also supports my endurance endeavors. So I believe there are 4 questions you should probably ask yourself before deciding whether hybrid training is right for you. And by the end of this video, I want to make sure that you've got a clear understanding of whether it's right for you. And then if it is, what are your next steps? So let's start with question number 1. So question number 1 has to be, are you strong enough to start hybrid training? Now, this might come across a bit shitty, and you don't necessarily need to be strong to train like a hybrid athlete. However, when you look at some of the top athletes pushing the hybrid lifestyle and the hybrid way of training, they come from a very big gym/strength bias background. And that includes myself. Not that I'm a top athlete in the space, but I'm someone that's pursued strength training for over 12 years. It's underpinned everything that I've done. So now when I introduce all this endurance training on top of my training, I can afford to put my strength training on a bit of a maintenance phase or tiny build, because all my focus is currently now pushing more towards building a strong engine so I can push more in my triathlon based endeavors. So taking some of the effort away from the strength training to pursue some more endurance bias goals is a worthy trade-off, because strength takes time to build, but it also takes time to fade away. And especially if you're still keeping up with strength training while you're doing your endurance training, you're still touching base with some of these moderate numbers. You're not just going to suddenly become weak. So you have to ask yourself, is pursuing both strength training and endurance training a worthy trade-off to be kind of good at both and not really great at either? For me, it is. But that's because I've built a big base over the years. So you have to ask yourself, have you just got into training? Can you afford to not put a good 6 to 12 months or even more on like a standard linear strength progression program and just get strong? Get at least to your body weight in all your big lifts, like your barbell back squat, bench press, deadlift. Because we need to understand that when you include endurance training within your strength training, you're going to be carrying over fatigue from those endurance sessions into the strength sessions. Now, this isn't necessarily a problem, but if you're new to this, you probably want to be having most of your focus and most of your energy and your recovery capabilities on focusing on one thing. However, if you've been training for a couple of years and you think, do you know what? I want to kind of do something more with my fitness rather than just going to the gym and lifting weights, then hybrid training is a really good option because it's an opportunity for you to be strong and be fit. And at the end of the day, when the zombie apocalypse comes, you can't just be strong and you can't just be fit. You need to be both. So second question you have to ask yourself is, do you have the time to train like a hybrid athlete? Now, this does depend on the type of hybrid training you want to do, whether that's just strength training and running, or whether that's say strength training and say triathlon, for example. You have to look at your diary and say, right, can I fit in the required amount of training needed to be good at both strength training and endurance training? But not only just the training, you have to ask yourself, do I have enough time to be able to recover in between training sessions to get the most out of your efforts? You have to ask yourself, what commitments do you have? Do you have family commitments? Do you have work commitments? What's your diary like? Can you do double days? So can you train in the morning and can you train in the evening? Do you have enough capacity to add in many different styles of training? Now, if you are looking to try and see how can you put it all in within your training week, it does mean you need to kind of plan ahead and be a bit smarter with your time blocking. So for me, I have to make sure I get my big endurance sessions done first thing in the morning. So I'm normally waking up about 4 a.m. so that I'll be done by about 6, 7 a.m. This means it doesn't interfere with the family. And it also means I normally get a decent amount of recovery time till my strength session. Now, what this does mean is to ensure that I can get sufficient recovery, I have to put a lot of focus on my eating, and I have to also get a big focus on my sleep. So I'm in bed most nights by say 8 p.m., which means even if I'm getting up at 4, I'm getting around the 7 to 8 hours of sleep every single night. Because if I didn't go to bed at 8 and I started to push out towards more 9/10 o'clock, I can't get up at 4 o'clock and then do my endurance training and work and then do my strength training and then try to balance everything else in the family life. It's a lot on the body and it's a lot to ask my body to kind of put up with. So I now go to bed with my kids when they go to bed so that I can then get up in the morning and get the work done. So even though I don't necessarily have the time, I've made the time, because it's a pursuit that I'm looking to do. So if your training requires you to say do a double day, then you might have to bear in mind, okay, cool, do I need to go to sleep earlier so I can get up earlier? Maybe you can get away with just training once a day. And if you're just getting into hybrid training, I would probably suggest that. So question number 3 is, do you have the patience to train like a hybrid athlete? Now, this purely is based on if you specialize into a specific style of training, your rates of progress will be faster. For instance, when I doubled down on powerlifting and just did powerlifting, I achieved my lifetime goals of hitting a 300 kilo deadlift and a 250 kilo squat because all my efforts went into training 4 times a week and recovering outside of that. Now, because I specialize into a specific style of training, I was able to put all my efforts towards that. Whereas now that I'm doing a more hybrid approach to my style of training, where I'm trying to get good at triathlon while also maintaining my strength, it means I can't double down on triathlon and put all my efforts into that style of training. Now, for me at the moment, that is an okay trade-off. I know when I get to my first half Ironman race in May, I could be a lot better than I am at triathlon if I wasn't also trying to be as strong as possible, because my personal goal is to be the fittest powerlifter and the strongest triathlete. That's not going to win me a triathlon, and it's not going to win me a powerlifting meet. But where I am right now in my life, that's what I want to pursue. So you have to ask yourself, are you happy with a bit of a slower rate of progression across the board? Or do you want to achieve something faster? Now, if you choose to achieve something faster, it's normally going to come at the cost of something else. When I decided to pursue powerlifting and be as strong as possible, I was so unfit and I didn't like how I felt. However, now that I'm blending both strength and endurance, I'm decently strong, but I'm also feeling fit, which means my day-to-day feeling is a lot better because I feel fitter and I feel ready for anything. Whereas when I was focused on powerlifting, I felt really strong, which was great. It's a really good feeling. But playing with my kids got me out of breath and I thought, this probably isn't the one. But for that moment in my life, that was a pursuit that I wanted to do, and I did. So if you're willing for a bit of a slower rate of progress, but it's progress nonetheless, hybrid training is a really nice way to use your body, because the feeling of feeling big, strong, and fit is a good one. Now, lastly, question number 4 is, do you have a specific goal? Now, this kind of lends itself to the point before where we were discussing about, do you have the patience? But if you have a specific goal, then you want to do your best so you can put the most effort into achieving that goal. Now, if you've got, say, a hybrid goal where you want to, say, run a half marathon and lift a certain amount in your squat, bench, and deadlift, then crack on. If you give yourself enough time, you can achieve some pretty amazing results. Whereas if you have, say, you want to run a half marathon in a certain time, adding in the strength training is probably going to slow you down, because your ability to run hard and fast may be hindered by your strength training. Now, that interference effect isn't necessarily a problem for most of us, but if you want to, say, run a half marathon in a certain time, you're going to want to make sure you put all your effort and intensity into all the training runs you need to do to achieve that, and all the splits that you need to hit to achieve that goal. Because what you don't want is, say, your deadlift session, maybe fatiguing your lower back and your hamstrings, and then you go into a big run session and not be able to perform at your best because of that deadlift session. Whereas if your goal was to run a good half marathon for you, then you can do both, because you don't mind that interference effect. You don't mind the fact that you're going into a running session feeling a little bit beaten up, because it's the act of doing both which is what you're pursuing, being able to deadlift and being able to run, rather than I want to run the half marathon in this time. And it's going to be the same for strength training. If you're looking to deadlift, say, 300 kilos, you're probably not going to add in some running, because by adding in a load of running is going to carry over fatigue into your deadlift sessions. So it all depends on what is your goal. And if you want to achieve some amazing feats in both strength and endurance, you can do that. But you do have to bear in mind the trade-offs that will have to be made to help you achieve whatever you're setting yourself out to achieve. Now, most of us who are, say, training in this hybrid way where we're blending both strength and endurance just want to keep moving the needle forward in both. And if, for instance, one day we come in and have to squat 140 kilos, then we hit a 10K on the weekend and it carries us some fatigue to the next squat session, and then we only manage to hit, say, 130 kilos, it is what it is. Most of us will be happy with that, because we still got that same perceived effort. We still got that stress that we was after. It does mean we didn't hit the same weight or more, but we achieved a 10K run PB. So if you're looking to get good at both, that is the trade-off we're willing to take. But if you program your training just right, you can achieve both at the same time. But our expectations do have to be kind of set properly to make sure that when we're working towards them, they feel achievable, but slightly out of reach. So you do have to keep striving to working as hard as possible to achieve them. So what are the takeaways from this video? Firstly, have you answered those 4 questions? Are you strong enough to start hybrid training? Have you got the time to start hybrid training? Do you have the patience to do hybrid training? And do you have a specific goal in mind? If you've answered those 4 questions and hybrid training is sounding like the next best thing for you to try and do, great. For me, I can't recommend it enough. By adding in endurance training within my strength training, I now feel fit, I feel big, I feel strong, I feel great day to day. I have a better relationship towards food. I have a lot better sleep because my output is now more. And generally, I just feel really good that I've now introduced endurance training as part of my training methodology. So if hybrid training is sounding pretty good for you to start cracking on with, don't just go out there and grab a strength program and say a running program and do both of those, because the fatigue that will build up from doing both of those programs will not only probably get you injured, but you'll probably burn out and then say, fuck it, hybrid training wasn't worth it for me. It didn't work for me. Whereas if you think about, okay, how can I program effectively to make sure I can get the best of both, so like running and strength training, then you can look to get the best out of you by doing the best out of both. So if hybrid training is sounding pretty good and you're like, do you know what? This sounds like the right thing for me to start doing, then that's great. Really glad to hear. And I hope these questions that we've kind of discussed before has given you a clear insight into how you want to pursue hybrid training. Now, the chosen endurance discipline that you're going to choose to pursue alongside your strength training is going to be completely dependent to you and what has the lowest barrier of entry. And what do you enjoy the most doing? If it's cycling, great, crack on. For most of us, it'll probably be running, because you can just grab a pair of running trainers and get running outside. Running has one of the lowest barrier of entries to start doing. So if you're thinking about what one should I do, maybe start there. Now, as I discussed a little bit earlier in the video, if you're going to start adding running in, maybe look to add it in 2 to 3 times a week at the end of your strength training sessions. Maybe take away an accessory block, let's say at the end of those 2 or 3 sessions, and add in a run instead, so a light jog. So you're going to run for about 5 to 10 minutes, easy pace, getting your body accustomed to maybe adding in some endurance training within your training, without changing how long you're training for. For instance, if your training session was already an hour, taking away 10 minutes on the last lot of accessories and maybe throwing in a light easy run there instead, it means you're still training for an hour, but now you're developing both strength and endurance. Now, when you feel ready to progress from, say, some 5 to 10 minute easy jogs at the end of your sessions, you can start to add in some structured running sessions, and you can start structuring your running towards a specific goal. Now, if you want to learn how to program for yourself to do some lifting and running, check out the next video where I break down how to structure your week so you can get the most out of your strength training and your running training and pursue a 10K goal. However, if you want an already done for you program where you can do some lifting and running, get stronger in your squat, bench and deadlift over 13 weeks, while also getting faster at your 5 or 10K, or maybe even getting your first 5K, then you can check out the link in the description for my lift and run program. This lift and run program is 13 weeks with a test week at the start to see where you're currently at, and then over the following 12 weeks we build up your strength across the board and get you fit at the same time. You might also find a little cheeky discount code down there in the description below. So I hope today's video gave you a good insight into whether you should start hybrid training, and I'll see you in that next video where we learn how to program your week to get stronger and fitter.